Hi, I'm Maya, and today I want to talk about The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. Okay, so to start off, I have been a fan of the musical for a very, very long time. For my Sweet 16, I got to see The Phantom of the Opera on Broadway, and it changed my life. I listened to the music all through high school and college. It was kind of like the soundtrack for my life. But I had never read the book until recently, and I really didn't know what to expect. I didn't know how closely they stuck to the book with the musical. I didn't know how much they changed, and I just have to say that it was an amazing book. I had the time of my life reading it. I had been in a major book slump, and then I read this book and it made me feel like I wanted to fly. Like, it totally got me out of bed. I read it in like 2 or 3 days. I think I would have read it in one day if I didn't have a baby to take care of. But like, I could not put it down. It was so, so good. Obviously, in the musical, they have to change a few things. They have to cut a few characters and a few scenes because, there's only so much time in a musical as compared to a book. But for the most part, they stuck really close to the source material. And all of the iconic things in the musical come straight from the book. The organ, the mirror, the boat, keep your hand at the level of your eye, Don Juan triumphant, Box 5, the masquerade, the Phantom hiding behind the statue on the roof, the Phantom leaving notes for everybody in the opera house signed OG, Opera Ghost. So it is to be war between us. Just all of the best stuff. The chandelier, like literally all of the best parts of the musical, all of those iconic visuals and lines and moments all come directly from the book. And so reading this book just made me love the musical even more and just made me even more enthralled with the story. And the whole time I was reading the book, I just kept hearing the music in my head. So the three main characters in the story are Christine Daae, an opera singer, and her two love interests, Raoul, an aristocrat, and Eric, the Phantom of the Opera. I was worried when I started reading the book that Christine was just going to be a flat character because in a lot of older books, especially written by men, most of the time female characters don't have a lot of depth to them. They're often just cookie cutter. So that's what I thought Christine might be in this book, but she was not, and I was so happy about that. So I don't think they ever mentioned this in the musical, but in the book, Christine is Swedish. Her father is Swedish, and so she grows up hearing Scandinavian fairy tales. Because of that upbringing, she is a very innocent, trusting person with this childlike sense of wonder. And that's why she's so susceptible to the Phantom and why she falls under his spell so easily. It's easy for her to get swept away in his mystery and his magic because she grew up just entrenched in those stories and those folk tales. Hearing them over and over again from her father, just that completely molded the way that she views the world. But she's not just some passive, pretty little doll. There's a lot more to her. One of my favorite scenes is when Christine is on the stage singing and she's kind of nervous and she's maybe not doing as well as she has in the past because there's just a lot going on in her life. Then she looks out in the crowd and she sees her rival singer, Carlotta, and instantly she decides right then and there that she is going to be better than Carlotta, that this is going to be the best performance she's ever done. And I love that Christine has that spark in her, that fire and that pride. I love that she is singing for herself in that moment because up until that point, she's really just been singing for her father who loved music and was a musician, or for her love interests who love her voice. But in that moment, she's wanting to get back at her rival, she's fighting her rival, and she's doing it for herself, to prove to herself that she has talent. I also really admire Christine's compassion. I love how much empathy she has for the Phantom. He's been abused and mistreated and ostracized his whole life because of his appearance, because of his deformity. Her heart just breaks for him. She wants to be his friend, she wants to take care of him, and she truly admires his genius and his talent. And she thinks it's a travesty that the world doesn't appreciate all that he has to offer because of the way he looks. She really does come to fall in love with him. And so I just really admire Christine's heart. I think she's a very sweet, loving person. She really goes through a lot in the story, losing her father and missing him, and then feeling like she gets him back in the form of the angel of music, which her father promised her he would return to her in that way. And then that's the title that the Phantom uses to describe himself. Obviously, Christine is not a stupid person. Part of her knows that this is not her father, but she wishes that it was, that she misses him so much. And so she's willing to delude herself a little bit. I just think she's a very well written, very fascinating character and a great lead for this novel. And then there's her love interests. The Phantom, I've already talked about a little bit, is just a fantastic character. The author wants you to pity him. He blatantly says that at the end of the book, like, you're supposed to pity the Phantom. And it's supposed to be like a mirror for our society and makes you stop and think as the reader, how do I treat people who look differently than I do? Why do we as a society shun people that don't fit into our molds and our norms? That's a great message. But I do think it's also important to acknowledge that yes, we can pity the Phantom, we can acknowledge that it's awful what he's been through, but we still need to admit that he takes it too far. It's not okay to kidnap people. It's not okay for him to keep Christine hostage against her will. And it's not okay for him to set booby traps that end up killing a bunch of people. It's understandable, like, how he gets to that point, but at the same time, we have to say, hey, you know, he crossed the line. So he is, in that way, a sort of villain and a sort of antagonist. I think that just makes him even more compelling, right? It adds just another layer of complexity to his character. Both can be true at the same time. You can feel really bad for him and also condemn what he does. Okay, and then the third main character, Christine's other love interest, Raoul, he is probably the weakest of the three characters. I feel like Christine and the Phantom, we really learn a lot about their backstory. Christine and the Phantom are really well thought out. They feel like real people that we know. Raoul doesn't really feel that way. You don't really get to go into his backstory that much. He's kind of just a spoiled rich kid. I guess we do have this one tidbit that he might go exploring in the Arctic or something like that. So I guess that shows that he's adventurous and brave. But what rubbed me the wrong way about Raoul is how jealous and possessive he is of Christine. I was surprised that the jealousy bothered me because usually I love jealousy in a book. It's one of my favorite tropes and it's one of my favorite ways to get drama going between characters. Is watching a character be jealous of how a character is interacting with another potential suitor. But I think Raoul does it so much that it's like it's too much, you know? I think the reason it bothers me is because in other books I've read where there's a character who's jealous, usually their jealousy is aimed at the other suitor, not at the object of their desires. And so that has the fun tension and drama. But with Raoul and the Phantom and Christine, this love triangle, Raoul is aiming a lot of his anger at Christine herself and is accusing her of being unfaithful, and it's like, come on, really? But one thing that the author emphasizes over and over again is how young Raoul is. Like, he's supposed to be a very, very young man. And so I'm hoping that means that he will mature and grow out of this weird possessiveness, jealousy thing. Because in the end, the two of them do end up together. So I want them to be happy. I want Christine to have a happy ending. And so in my brain, I'm just going to imagine that as the years go on, as they grow as a couple, Raoul grows up, matures, and gets over the whole jealousy stuff. So that's number one. This book has great characters. Number two, it has a great premise. The Paris Opera House is haunted by a ghost. Every time something creepy or inexplicable happens, people blame it on the ghost. And of course, there are characters who wholeheartedly believe in the ghost, and there are characters who do not think he exists at all. It's really fun to learn, of course, that the ghost is real, but he's not a ghost, he's just a man. And it's fun to have all of the supernatural witchcraft stuff explained, because the author goes in and explains every single weird thing that pops up, every phenomenon. He explains how it was done with trapdoors, sleight of hand, smoke and mirrors, secret walls, secret rooms, tunnels underground, machinery. And I think as a reader, it's so fun to, in the beginning, see all of these magical things happening, all these spooky things happening. And then later, it's all explained to us, and we learn that everything can be explained. Everything was done by the Phantom, Eric. Eric is just so talented. In the musical, I feel like it really just focuses on his musical talent, his musical genius as a composer and a singer. And the book does talk about those things, but it also describes how he is an expert ventriloquist and an engineer and a magician and is really just a jack of all trades. And he has so many skills like lassoing and sleight of hand. the tricks that he's had to learn growing up in the shadows, being forced into exile everywhere he goes because people can't stand the sight of him. Because of the way he's been treated in the world, he has developed these skills out of necessity. He's a very sad character, but also so inspiring and also scary and troubling. Just a very well-rounded, complex character. And I think the most heartbreaking scene in the book, the part that when I read it, my heart hurt, when he's crying and Christine's crying and he takes his mask off and their tears mingle together and he says that is the most joyful he's ever felt. Like, oh my goodness, how heart-wrenching is that moment of crying with Christine is the happiest he's ever felt. In his life, all that he has experienced is cruelty. His parents hated him because he was deformed. He's never had any love, any compassion, any empathy until Christine, and she is just an angel to him. And they share this beautiful moment where they're just crying and the tears are mixing together, and it's just beautiful. It's so beautifully written and so tragic and just gorgeous. So this book is amazing because of the characters and the premise, but also because of the storytelling. The story is presented to us as an account delivered to us by a historian who has done a bunch of research about this case of the Phantom of the Opera and the deaths that were involved and the intrigue that happened. And it's kind of like a police report. There are excerpts from memoirs and testimonies from eyewitnesses, and it's constantly shifting POV. It's a very cinematic book, and it was published in 1909, and I just feel like it was very ahead of its time from a storytelling standpoint. It'll start off from one character's perspective, and an image will be introduced, and then several chapters later, we'll be hearing from another character and their perspective, and they will mention that image that we saw earlier, and they'll explain it in more detail. And so in that way, it feels like the same storytelling technique as a modern day heist movie, where the story is unfolded piece by piece, and we watch as things are introduced to us, and we don't know exactly how it's going to work out yet, but then if you keep watching, oh, now it's explained. And yeah, it's just the overlapping narratives and the providing more context later, and the ah moments, and it's so good. Yeah, so it's a great mystery crime book to learn the secrets of the mystery and the method for the crimes. Also, another thing I love about this book is how creepy it is. It's definitely gothic, it definitely has horror elements. One of my favorite parts in the whole book, it's so random, it just comes out of nowhere. It's when Raoul is going to save Christine from the Phantom, and he's underneath the opera house and he's walking through the tunnels, and all of a sudden this man walks past him, and he's a rat catcher, and he's just there with a bunch of rats, and it's so creepy. Like, right now it sounds funny because it's so random, but when I read it, I got chills. I'm like, oh, this is so creepy. Like, it's creepy how big the opera house is, the structure itself, but also everything underneath it. There's a lake under there, there's stables, there are so many dressing rooms, so many tunnels, so many secret chambers, an entire house. Like, the Phantom's just living down there. He has his own little village down there, and it's so creepy to think about how people are just walking around there, living down there, and nobody has any idea. It kind of reminds me of the movie Parasite. Very creepy. Another deliciously creepy moment in this book is when Raoul is in his bed and he sees the Phantom's eyes at the foot of his bed. He doesn't see face, a body, he just sees the eyes glowing at the foot of his bed. And it's so creepy, it's so scary, it's so good. I think what makes this book so amazing is that it dives into so many different genres, and it contains so many multitudes, because it's horror, it's gothic, it's tragic, it's romantic, it's crime, police, mystery, drama. It literally has it all. It's so good. And it's funny, it's clever. The characters say funny things and funny situations happen, and there's witty banter, and the author has footnotes that go with his research that further explain what he's found from the memoirs and the testimonies. And it's such an immersive experience reading this book. The opera house itself feels like a character. Like I said earlier, it's huge, it's massive, it has all of these moving parts. It's a labyrinth, all these sets and the stage and the seats and the boxes, and you really just get sucked into it. You just feel like you're in the opera house watching all of this happen. You're hanging out with the ballet dancers and the singers and the managers. All of the side characters are interesting, in my opinion. I really enjoyed learning about all of them, and I feel like they all contribute to this big plot, this big story. And you can see why it inspired a musical, because it's so majestic and dramatic and sweeping and grand. Just beautiful. It's just a beautiful work of art that inspired another beautiful work of art. So I did want to talk about a few of the differences, things that the musical cut. For obvious reasons, you can't fit everything into a musical. There's a character in the book that is just called the Persian. Like, he doesn't have a name, but he knows Eric, the Phantom's entire backstory, and he's where we learn everything about Eric and his tragic past. The Persian is with Raoul when he's going through the tunnels looking for Christine to save her from the Phantom. So I can see why they cut him, because you can kind of just like have the Phantom himself describe his past. You don't really need the Persian in the musical. I think in the book he's an interesting character. He is someone that Raoul can talk to and like ideas can get bounced off of. And he's actually a very compassionate person, because he was a police chief or something. He was commanded to put Eric, the Phantom, to death. He decided not to. He felt bad for him. And so the Phantom actually owes the Persian his life. And so that adds another interesting element of like honor and duty. Another character they cut is Philippe. He is Raoul's brother, and that adds just kind of another layer of drama, because Philippe doesn't want Raoul to marry Christine because he feels that she is beneath him, because Raoul is a viscount and Christine is just a lowly singer. Again, I can see why they cut him for the musical. You can only cram so many characters into a musical. But I did like him in the book. I liked having that extra element of drama and tension and strain put on Raoul and Christine's relationship. It's always fun to have more drama and more tension. Another big thing that's different is that in the musical it starts with an auction. There isn't an auction in the book. I wonder if it's just easier in a musical, since it's a visual medium, to have an auction, like something that you can see and watch happening, items getting sold and then the items being explained, like the past and what they mean, rather than in the book where it's a police report. I feel like a police report would be hard to present visually, so I can see why they went with an auction instead. One thing that is in the book that is also in the musical is Eric, the Phantom, has a high voice. So it's perfect that traditionally a tenor is cast as the Phantom to have that higher range. Another thing I loved about this book was just learning more about the behind the scenes, like all the backstage stuff, all of the production that goes into making an opera, learning about the door shutters and how they are old men who used to be like stagehands or whatever. They're poor and they like need a job, and managers of the opera don't want to, put them out on the street, so they give them a job that's easy for an older person to do, which is just being in charge of shutting doors so that drafts don't get in and ruin the opera singers' voices. I thought that was interesting. So yeah, in case it wasn't already obvious, I love this book. It has quickly shot up to one of my favorite books of all time. It's like definitely in the top 10 now. I want to go listen to the music now. I want to watch the movie. I want to go see the musical on Broadway again. I want to reread this book. I love the world building, and I love the questions that this book brings up. I love how this book makes you reflect on what is a monster, what makes a monster, why do we treat people like monsters, how do we create monsters. Do yourself a favor and read it. It's an amazing, amazing book. If you're a fan of the musical, you will be a fan of the book. I feel like I've been talking for hours, and I feel like I could keep going, but I'm gonna cut myself off. It's a beautiful, tragic, amazing book. So that's The Phantom of the Opera. Thank you so much for watching.